Hi, good day everyone. This is Randy Bilareza, a BS Mining Engineering student of St. Paul University, Surigao, your presenter for today's topic. Highlights of the Mining Act of 1995, also known as URA 7942, and its implementing rules and regulations. So, let's begin now. The Philippine Mining Act of 1995 and its revised implementing rules and regulations is considered in the industry today as one of the most socially and environmentally sensitive legislations in its class. This act has specific provisions that take into consideration: first, local government empowerment; second, respect and concern for the indigenous cultural communities; third, equitable sharing of benefits of natural wealth; fourth, economic demands of present generation while providing the necessary foundation for the future generations; fifth, worldwide trend towards globalization; and protection for and wise management of the environment. So, let's proceed now. Governing principles. The implementing rules and regulations, or DEN, are Administrative Order Number 96-40 of the Philippine Mining Act of 1995, provides strict adherence to the principle of sustainable development. So, what is sustainable development? Sustainable development. This strategy mandates that the needs of the present should be met without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs, with the view of improving the quality of life, both now and in the future. In addition, the principles of sustainable mining is that mining is a temporary land use for the creation of wealth, leading to an optimum land use in post-mining stage as consequences of progressive and engineered mine rehabilitation works done in cycle with mining operations. Also, mining activities must always be guided by current best practices in environmental management committed to reducing the impacts of mining while efficiently and effectively protecting the environment and the wealth created as a result of mining accruing to the government and the community should lead to other wealth-generating opportunities for people in the communities and for other environment responsible endeavors. Next of to be discussed is that the organizational implementation. Under organizational implementation is the role of MGB, or Mining and Geoscience Bureau. So, management and administration of mineral lands and resources, including the granting of mining permits and mineral agreements. The enforcement and monitoring of environmental work programs, or EWP, and environmental protection and enhancement program, or EPEP. The establishment and operationalization of contingent liability and rehabilitation fund, as well as the mandatory final mine rehabilitation and decommissioning plan. And the cancel mining applications and mining rights violating the provisions of the Mining Act, its implementing rules and regulations, and or the terms and conditions of a mining permit, contract, and the agreement. Let's proceed. Role of LGU. LGU as beneficiaries and active participants. In this act, in consonance with the Local Government Code of 1992, LGUs have a share of 40% of the gross collection derived by the national government from mining taxes, royalties and other such taxes, fees, or charges from mining operations, in addition to the occupational fees of 30% to the province and 70% to the municipalities concerned. In addition, in consonance with the LGU and the People's Small-Scale Mining Act, also known as URA 7076, the LGUs shall be responsible for the issuance of permits for small-scale mining and quarrying operations through the provincial or city mining regulatory boards, or PMRBEST or CMRBs. Okay, let's continue. Next is the areas concerning mining application. In this part, we are discussing the two concerned, which is areas closed and may open to mining applications. So, areas closed to mining application, areas covered by valid and existing mining rights and applications. The old growth or virgin forests, mossy forests, national parks, provincial or municipal forests, tree parks, greenbelts, game refuge, bird sanctuaries, and areas proclaimed as marine reserve or marine parks and tourist zones as defined by law and identified initial components of the NIPIS, in such areas as expressly prohibited thereunder, as well as under DEN, our Administrative Order Number 25, since 1992, and other laws. while in areas may open to mining applications, military and other government reservations, upon prior written consent by the government agency having jurisdiction over such areas, and areas near or under public or private buildings, cemeteries, and archaeological and historic sites, bridges, highways, waterways, railroads, reservoirs, dams, and other infrastructure projects, public or private works, including plantations or valuable crops, upon written consent of the concerned government agency or private entity, subject to technical evaluation and validation by the MGB. Next is the Ancestral Lands and ICCCs. Under this topic, explain that the Mining Act fully recognizes the rights of the IPs and ICCCs and respect their ancestral lands. Thus, the following shall be observed. First, no mineral agreements, FTTA and mining permits shall be granted in ancestral lands or domains except with prior informed consent in A, CADC or CLC areas. B. Areas verified by the DEN or regional office and or appropriate offices as actually occupied by indigenous cultural communities under a claim of time immemorial possession. Second, where written consent is granted by the ICCCs, a royalty payment shall be negotiated which shall not be less than 1% of the gross output of the mining operations in the area. Next is the social and community development and research development. In this part, explain that the mining contractors or operators shall allocate a minimum of 1% of their direct mining and milling costs. In this, development of the host and neighboring communities and mine camp, including the construction and maintenance of social infrastructures to promote the general welfare of the inhabitants in the area. Also, for the development of mining technology and geosciences, particularly those related to improved efficiencies and environmental protection and rehabilitation. So, without further ado, let's proceed to the next part of this topic. Environmental and safety concerns. In this, we have what we called environmental protection. Mandatory allocation of an approximately 10% of the initial capital expenditures of the mining project for environment-related activities. Mandatory annual allocation of 3 to 5% of the direct mining and milling costs to implement an annual environmental protection and enhancement program. Mandatory establishment of a mine rehabilitation fund, or MRF, to be composed of: first, a monitoring trust fund of 50,000 pesos which is replenishable, and second, a rehabilitation cash fund of 5 million or 10% of the EPEP cost, whichever is lower. Such funds are to be deposited as trust account in a government depository bank to be managed by MRF committee composed of the MGB Regional Director, DENR Regional Executive Director, representatives from the LGU and an NGO, and the contractor. Mandatory establishment of the Contingent Liability and Rehabilitation Fund to be managed by a steering committee chaired by the MGB Director with members coming from concerned government agencies. Conduct of environmental work program during the exploration stage and an environmental protection and enhancement program during the development and operation stage. Institutionalization of an incentive mechanism to mining companies utilizing engineered and will maintain mine waste and tailings disposal systems with zero discharge of materials or effluents and or with wastewater treatment plants. Mandatory constitution and operationalization of a multipartite monitoring team composed of representatives from the MGB, DEN or regional office, affected communities, indigenous cultural communities, and environmental NGO, and the contractor or permit holder to monitor mining operations. And lastly, mandatory establishment and operationalization of a mine environmental and protection and enhancement office or MIPO in each mining or contract area which shall set the level of priorities and marshal the resources needed to implement environmental management programs. Next is on social acceptability. So, the mining contractors or operators shall allocate a minimum of 1% of their direct mining and milling costs for the development. It is also explained that host and neighboring communities and mine camp to promote the general welfare of inhabitants in the area. This includes construction and maintenance of infrastructures such as roads and bridges, school buildings, housing and recreational facilities, water and power supplies, and mining technology and geosciences, particularly those related to improved efficiencies and environmental protection and rehabilitation. We're almost now on the last part of our discussion, so, without further ado, let's proceed. Next is mining permits granted. Under mining permits granted, there's different mining permits. First, exploration permit, issued to qualified individuals or local and foreign corporations, and has a term of 2 years renewable for like terms but not exceed a total term of 6 years for non-metallic minerals and 8 years for metallic minerals. Second, mineral agreement are granted to individuals or local corporations, giving them the right to explore, develop, and utilize the minerals within the contract area. In addition, mineral agreement has 3 modes, including Mineral Production Sharing Agreement or MPSA, the Co-Production Agreement or CA, and Joint Venture Agreement or JVA. Third, Mineral Production Sharing Agreement, an agreement wherein the government grants to the contractor the exclusive right to conduct mining operations within, but not title over, the contract area and shares in the production whether in kind or in value as the owner of the minerals therein. Fourth, Co-Production Agreement, an agreement between the government and the contractor wherein the government shall provide inputs to the mining operations other than the mineral resources. Fifth, Joint Production Agreement, an agreement where the government and the contractor organize a joint venture company with both parties having equity shares. Aside from earnings in equity, the government shall be entitled to a share in the gross output. Sixth, Financial or Technical Assistance Agreement, term of 25 years, extendable for like periods. Minimum capitalization for $1 million or its peso equivalent. Minimum investment for infrastructure and development of $50 million. Subject to environmental work program during the exploration or pre-feasibility study or feasibility study period, and to environmental compliance certificate or ECC and environmental protection and enhancement program or EPEP during the development and operation period. And the approval by the President, upon recommendation of the negotiating panel composed of the DEN Secretary, the MGB Director, and the representatives from NATA, DTI or BOE, Department of Finance, DEN Field Operations Office, DEN Legal Office, and MGB Regional Office. Seventh, sand and gravel permits are issued for the extraction, removal, and disposition of sand and gravel and other loose or unconsolidated materials. And a sand and gravel permit has a term of 5 years and renewable for like terms. Eighth and last, quarry resources permits include the following: quarry permit, guano permit, gratuitous permit, and the gemstone gathering permit. So, let's proceed. Taxes incentives. Under of it is the other incentives in this Mining Act. So, some of this incentives are incentives for pollution control devices, incentives for income tax carry forward of losses, incentives for income tax accelerated depreciation on fixed assets, and investment guarantees, such as investment repatriation, earnings remittance, freedom from expropriation, and requisition of investment, and confidentiality of information. Let's continue. Next is taxes paid. In taxes paid, there's a tax payment that includes corporate income tax, excise tax on minerals, customs duties, value-added tax, royalties on minerals extracted from mineral reservation, documentary stamp tax, and the capital gains tax. And that's end our presentation and discussion for today's topic. Thank you for listening.